micro, and culture. So today we're going to present the influence of organization on culture on leadership. This is a case study from Montenegro. All right, let's jump to the research questions. To this article, we will tackle two main questions by which is what is the relationship between organization and culture and leadership, and how do they determine each other? This article argued that there are several studies that raised up that the leadership influence the organizational culture more than the opposite. So the purpose of this study is to prove that the influence of organizational culture on leadership by providing examples, research methods, and instruments. Let's get to the literature review. We're going to the definitions. The definitions to distinguish the components and values between the cultures within an organization will split it into two types. We have the distribution of power, which is differentiated between the hierarchical and the egalitarian culture. The hierarchical meaning that the power is centered within the individual, and the egalitarian culture meaning that the power is distributed equally among the team. Secondly, we have the primary focus of organization, which is determined whether the organization culture is task-oriented, whether the organization favor the task to be done, or how the employee feel and the relationship. To distinguish their value and norms, we have a matrix of four cultures underneath this, starting with the power culture. You can think the power culture is like the father within the family, where the father will make most of the decision and the responsibility, and his children, especially the employee, will listen to him without questions. Next, we have the role culture. You can think the role culture is more like a machine. It's like a social system where it's governed by rules and regulations in the company. Next, thirdly, we have the task culture, where you think the corporation exists to solve problems, to solve tasks, and to achieve goals. Lastly, we have the people culture, where the organization exists to satisfy the employees' needs and achievements. On the criteria and statistics, we have two types of leadership style. Firstly, the authoritarian and the participant. Underneath these two leadership styles, we have four. First one, we have a people-oriented authoritarian. The leader will take most responsibility and most power, where he could make most decisions. Secondly, we have the task-oriented authoritarian, where the leader will set out goals and focus on the labor instead of focusing on himself. Thirdly, we have the participative task-oriented style, where the leader wants the employee to acknowledge the goals of the company and wants the employee to have the mindset that the more participants involved in decision making, the more it's better. Lastly, we have the participative style, that the leader wants the decision making should involve many people within it, and all the employees should have good relationships. Now we're moving to the methodology. We're going to the demographic. As you can see, the survey of the article is quite centered. It doesn't favor on one side only, where it has where it figures that the job position which contains the employee and manager at the same time. And as you can see, the gender of the survey has the gap of 8. If you split it in gender, it's just 4-4. It's in balance. The data collection has conducted 16 companies with 324 employees participating, with 400 questionnaires and 81% responses. On the company selection, as you can see, the survey is quite balanced because it's 8 state-owned, which means that it's managed by the government, and 8 private. Half of them going to the service industry, 5 of them going to retail, and 3 of us is going to manufacturing. Lastly, we have the variables and instruments. This article is used by the hand-use model, where it has a 50-question survey, and it's ranking from 4 culture types, starting from 1 is the most power-centered within an individual, to 4 is the least power-centered individual in the organization. As you can see, this is the culture type. And I will leave the stage to Sir Michael.
Sir Michael. Give it up to Sir Michael.
The main question that actually needed to be honest was the hypothesis of the organizational culture having a relationship with the leadership type, and it was confirmed. However, the inverse was not found true. Basically, the organizational culture could dictate the leader, but the leader type could not end up conflicting with the organizational culture that was already in place. Majority of the companies actually were found to be power-centric in their culture already. Unfortunately, this did not actually equate to how the decision-making process of the leaders were distributed, as all four categories favored task-oriented businesses as opposed to people decision-making process. When it comes to their culture type, they were trying to test whether or not the data supported each individual type. And unfortunately for power and people, they found out that there was a hypothesis that didn't really work. In Kelvin's explanation, the power role or power organizational culture basically would be like a family when the father is looking out for the relatives in the family. And yeah, his authority was absolute, but his decision-making process was for the good of the family, which would actually indicate a people-oriented decision-making process. However, also the same is true for people. The people, you would figure that their decision-making process would actually take into account the experience and the well-being of the people. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The power and role culture types, however, did actually dictate what type of leader would be acceptable by the organization, and power and role types would imply authoritarian, whereas task and people cultures would imply participatory leadership. And as I stated, the organizational culture determining the leadership type, that was actually verified, but the exact opposite could not be true. Because if a leader that did not actually mesh well with the organizational culture were to be in place, the organization would either revolt or find another way of just kicking out the job. That would not work. They tried to cover all the bases when it came to conducting this study, from an somewhat even split of gender to state and private owned businesses. They tried to take into account as many factors as possible in their research. The degree of involvement of employees versus the way problems were solved was the main idea of the actual research. The majority of the companies actually held a power culture, and most of the companies actually had a task culture provided. Organizational culture was determined and acceptable for the leadership type, and again, not the opposite. They actually found that the national culture might have had a greater influence on the outcome of the study than any of the indicators that they tried to actually test for. The results tended to raise more questions than answers. The article itself is relevant to the field. Most of the studies done before actually looked at it from the leader's perspective, but not too many actually looked at it from the employee's perspective. And this paper tried to actually. The target group was well-rounded. Unfortunately, the sample size was very limited. If you actually look at the numbers, only 400 questionnaires were sent out. If only 400 questionnaires were sent out, then they probably weren't targeting businesses with over 5,000 employees. And with so many variables being tested, how can you actually look at the bottom level and say that the results are going to be held true if the same study were actually conducted again on a larger scale? And once again, it was limited by employee perception of the company culture. Basically, their opinion on how things were done, and no hard data. The company size and the performance should have also been included. Would a more successful company have employees with a different perspective as opposed to a company that was considered to fail? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for this